1. When I was a sophomore in college, I lived with my grandparents as I didn't really like the dorms, and they were too expensive anyway. My grandparents lived about 20 miles from the school in a suburb-like small town, outside of the huge metro city that my university was in. Overall, it took about 30 minutes to drive there from the university. Part of the drive is a long stretch of highway that is just trees. After this section, you enter the town and turn on another woodsy-like road. You then take a right into the road that runs parallel to a neighborhood, with a brick wall surrounding it on the left and more trees on the right. The neighborhood is where my grandparents live. Their house is the very first cul-de-sac on the right, and directly next to the entrance of the neighborhood. At night you can even hear cars rush by on the road that runs parallel. If you keep going down this long road, eventually it loops back into the town like a big half circle. Basically, there is town, a little round patch of forest, and then the neighborhood, and the road just loops around it in a circle. One night I had stayed at the school until the early hours of the morning, working on a paper with one of my close friends. It is probably 3 a.m. on a Friday, and when I have half my paper written, I decide to turn in for the night. I walked my friend from the library to her dorm, which was right next to where I parked my car, and head to where I parked. I'm not particularly big or anything, I'm only a 5'3" girl, and she was only an inch taller than me. But we always walked each other everywhere because we believed in safety in numbers. As I walk to my car alone, I start to feel a little weird, like I'm being looked at. I get into my car safely and start my car. A car parked directly behind me also starts, and I can see the lights in my rearview mirror. So that's why I felt someone was watching me. Probably just another student up late studying. It was, after all, close to finals. I start driving to the freeway entrance. I notice that the same car is behind me. There are tons of streetlights on this stretch of road, so I can see it's a beat-up truck with a green canopy. I think nothing of it, since lots of students live in the suburb areas around the city, and theirs was probably southward like mine. I drive for a bit down the freeway, which is very well lit, and it is a very popular freeway that many people travel down a day. I lose sight of the truck behind me. I take the exit for the dark highway with the woods that I mentioned earlier, when I notice someone behind me is taking the same exit. You guessed it, it was the green truck. Starting to get freaked out now, I started to rationalize that it was just a student that lived near me, no big deal. It probably wasn't even the same truck, just a dark green big car. There are lots of those, right? I get into town and then take a turn to get to the neighborhood. So does the truck. I start breathing heavily, starting to panic a little. That's when he starts flashing his brights at me. At first I shake it off. Maybe there are bumps in the road, and since his lights are higher up than mine, I am in a small sedan. It just looks like he's flashing me. But it keeps happening. I check all my gauges on my dashboard, maybe a light is out. Or I have a tire that has low pressure, maybe my trunk is open. No lights on my dashboard is on. I take the turn onto the long road that my neighborhood is off of. He is still behind me, still flashing his brights at me. This is not just someone who lives close to me. This is definitely someone who is following me and trying to get me to pull over. I see the left turn to my neighborhood coming up. I don't know the neighborhood very well, and since my grandparents' house was so near the entrance, there would be no way to lose him. I decide not to turn into the neighborhood. He's still flashing me. I keep driving down the long road, so is he, flashing away. I'd get back to the town and take a hard right, going in the direction of where the police station is. I try to make out his license plate number, but since it's dark and his brights are on, I can't make it out. He has stopped flashing his lights at me at this point, since we are in town and there are some cars out on the road. He follows me to the police station as I park in the lot. Thankfully the lights are on in the station. I keep the car running and lock my doors as I stop. I start honking furiously, hoping someone in the station will hear me and come outside. since this isn't my hometown. I don't know the number of the station and just hope that someone will see me outside. The truck is parked far off behind me at the very back of the lot. The door opens and I start full-on panicking at this point, begging mentally for a police officer to come out of the station. Finally, someone walks out of the station and approaches my car, shouting at me. I see the truck door close behind me, and the lights turn on as it started up. In a rush, the truck drove away. Feeling safe, I told the officer what happened, and he invited me into the station and sent out a patroller looking for the dark green truck with the canopy. I don't know if they ever found or caught the guy, but I was finally in a safe place. I can't imagine what would have happened if I had not noticed it was the same truck, or if I had been a little less aware and had pulled over my car or just gone home as usual. I know, though, that it probably wouldn't have been good. 2. This past weekend, my soon-to-be wife, Alexia, and I had just settled down for a night of movies, pizza, and cuddling. We live in a residential area right outside of town. Our home situated right across the street from a Presbyterian church with a large cemetery behind it. Most of our neighbors don't own pets, but there's one in particular across the street and downward a bit, who owns perhaps the loudest, most annoying dog to ever exist. Quite an annoyance on a night like tonight, but luckily, it was quiet for the entire evening. It's around 10:15 p.m., and we're lying down watching a film in our living room when the loudest dog on earth begins to go off. Unfortunately, there's nothing much we can do, except, maybe, confront our neighbor or file a noise complaint, but who wants to be the neighbor who does that? After about 5 minutes, I get up off the couch and decide to walk over to our neighbor's home and say something about the dog. As I headed outside and made it to their driveway, unfortunately, I noticed that the neighbor wasn't home. Their only car not there. I decided, anyway, to walk up to the door and ring the bell. After a minute of no one answering, I gave up and headed back towards home. I noticed that Alexia had stepped outside and was looking on towards the direction of the barking. I told her that no one was home and that we should either ignore it or finally file a complaint. No one should have to deal with a loud dog at night, especially if you're trying to unwind after a long day of work or are trying to sleep. Alexia and I head back inside for a bit, and finally, after about 10 minutes, the dog ceases to bark. Alexia and I exhaled, then laughed a bit before continuing with our film. But of course, not long after that, the dog starts up again. This time it sounded vicious. I got up, went outside, and approached the neighbor's fenced-off backyard, and saw the dog, who must have heard or saw me coming. It stopped barking, walked up to me, and began to pant, in the cute way dogs do. I chuckled and said the dog's name, to which he looked at me and sat down. Such a good animal, even if he's so loud. I then heard something that sounded like somebody walking through leaves, coming from behind me and to the right. I turned around to see somebody looking at me from behind a gravestone in the cemetery. The dog must have heard this as well, as it sprung up and began to bark in the direction of the gravestone. I looked on as the person continued staring in my direction, and as the dog continued to bark. I looked towards my house where I saw Alexia, standing near her car looking at me with a confused look on her face. I looked in horror as I saw the person reveal himself from behind the gravestone. His forehead and cheek was stained red with blood, dripping down off of his chin. In his hand was some sort of dagger. The dog began to go ballistic as the person took a few steps in our direction before stopping. I turned to the dog, then back at my home. Alexia, who was still outside, yelled out to me what was wrong. I told her to call the police. She said, "Why, the dog?" To which I replied, "He's fucking armed." Probably confused, Alexia went inside to grab her phone, as I continued to watch on as the person began to back off, the dog now going berserk. It was going to take a bit of time for someone to reach our home, so I readied myself to go into self-defense as I watched the man finally turn around and walk away towards the back of the cemetery and towards the woods. When the police finally arrived, the person was long gone, and I was stuck there explaining to a couple of skeptical officers about my encounter. They didn't seem to take me that seriously, but still investigated the area as I explained to Alexia about the person I saw. When the police left after finding no trace of anyone, Alexia and I didn't feel much better. We locked our doors and windows, and I decided to call the neighbors to fill them in on everything before heading back to continue our movie night in spectacular fashion with The Exorcist. 3. To preface this, I work night shift at Walmart. My nights are almost always 10 p.m. to 7 a.m., except in these first few months of the year when they are actually cutting back our hours, and I sometimes start at 11 p.m. or leave at 6 a.m. Late last year, I'd say around September, when the weather was still nice outside, I'm only guessing because I remember I was wearing yogas and a t-shirt. I went into Walmart during the day to buy some groceries. I had a few things in my basket and was walking back from the back of the store towards the self-checkout area. I noticed out of my peripherals that a man, probably mid-20s, a little taller than me and wearing a baseball cap, was approaching me from the other side of the features, those promo displays that sit in the middle of those big aisles. When he was close, he started talking to me like we were acquaintances. I see people I know all the time when I'm here. Oh? I asked, assuming he's seen me there in the mornings while I was working. Yeah, it's weird how every time I'm here I see the same people all the time. He kept rephrasing himself, and I really didn't know what to say, as it was pretty awkward. He kept making small talk as I didn't stop walking to the self-checkout, and was just kind of going along with the conversation like you do when some random person is talking about the weather. Now that I look back on it, he told me he sees the same people all the time. I thought he looked a little familiar and assumed he was a vendor and worked some mornings there. And I mistakenly mentioned I worked there and also see the same faces. Then he told me to have a nice day, and I checked out and went to my car, dismissing the interaction. A lot of fellow employees greet me at Walmart when I go there during the day, so I didn't really think much of it. Then it got super weird super fast. I was just leaving the parking lot, and the exiting road splits into a left turn only lane, and the other a straightaway. I was turning, stopped, then this white Ford Explorer pulls up next to me and beeps loudly. I was already turning, but I looked into my rear view and surely enough, it was that guy from earlier. I recognized his face and his baseball cap. He sat at the stop, watching me pull away. Alright, a little weird, but he's probably just being friendly. When I got home, I told my boyfriend, and he immediately thought it was strange, and then said I was wrong for even engaging in conversation with this man, because guys get the wrong idea. My boyfriend also works with me on my shift, but his car has a blown head, so we've just been using mine to commute back and forth from work. So on nights I don't work, my car is still there if he works. Keep in mind that as employees we aren't allowed to park close to the store. We are limited to parking at the far end of the lot, or in front of the other stores in the shopping center. I have a typical spot. I always park in front of the AT&T place, which is next to the gym, which is next to Walmart. About 2 months ago, my boyfriend said he went to walk out to the car on break, and saw the white Ford Explorer parked next to it, the guy sitting inside. When he saw my boyfriend, he left. This happened again in the same month. My boyfriend was sitting in the car and the white Ford Explorer drove up to Walmart, then past my boyfriend staring at him. Then last month, I was driving home from work. It was barely 7 a.m., still pretty dark outside, and I was cruising down the highway towards the exit for my town. There was a car following 2 lengths behind me. We were both doing the speed limit, nothing abnormal. Suddenly, this car begins to speed up, gets in the fast lane as if to pass me, but slows down so that we are neck and neck. The driver turns on his interior light, waves at me, then speeds off. It was the guy in the white Ford Explorer. I just stared at him, bewildered. I didn't know what to think. Then it dawned on me. He knows where I work. He knows what my car looks like. It's pretty distinguishable, even from the back. I have shark fins along the top, decals, mud flaps, etc. He was probably waiting for me to leave work, then followed my car when I left. Thank God he didn't follow me home, because I never would have realized it. I was even totally unsuspecting when I walked out to my car alone. Now, what happened a couple days ago is why I'm even posting this. I think this is starting to escalate. It was a typical night. Both my boyfriend and I worked, along with our co-worker and friend. I'll call him Mark. When Mark works, we always park next to him so we can talk on lunch breaks, with the windows rolled down. Mark parks further away from the store, pretty much in the middle of nowhere. So we finish up the night, clock out, and Mark heads out to his car while boyfriend and I buy some stuff to make for dinner. We check out and head to the car. Mark is still there, which is unusual for him since he books it out of there like a bat out of hell every morning, with his window down. Hey man, did you get my text? He calls out, smoking a cigarette. No, let me check my phone. My boyfriend pulls out his phone, and I see a pretty long unread text from Mark. Pretty much this weird guy came out of nowhere, and he was touching and looking at inside of your girlfriend's car. Mark said. My immediate thought was some random likes my car enough to come up and touch it. Weird, but okay. Like, he just walked up and started touching the fins and looking inside it. Then he saw me sitting here and asked me about the decorations. I told him I didn't know anything about them, and then he told me to have a nice day. We immediately started checking for damages / tires, etc. Nothing. We get in the car, and the three of us just sit there contemplating the reasoning behind this. The Ford Explorer guy had almost slipped my mind. His encounters were a month or more apart. But then I started thinking about him again. There were two cars parked near us. A white 2010 Pontiac G6, and, surely enough, a white Ford Explorer. Up until this point, I didn't know the make of the car he drove, but I knew it was definitely a white SUV. Mark said he came from the direction of those two cars, so unless he walked to Walmart at 7 a.m., one of those cars was his. The Explorer was facing the opposite direction, and I quickly wrote down the plate number. I started asking Mark what the guy looked like. About your boyfriend's height. Kind of a gangster-looking guy. Keep in mind I've only seen the guy once, when he wasn't in his car, which was 4 months prior to this. The height sounded right, but I didn't really know. We decided to sit there and wait until this guy came out and confront him. Just as we were about to give up and leave, a guy starts walking our way out of Walmart. He was wearing a black hoodie, dark jeans, and camo bandana. When he saw us, he put his sunglasses on. Both of us looked towards Mark. Is that him? Is that the guy? No, that's not him. Mark shook his head. The guy walks to the Explorer, sits in the driver's seat and lights a cigarette, with the door open. After he closed it, I looked back to Mark. Are you sure it's not him? Yeah, it's him. That's the guy. Mark nodded. The Explorer guy started his car and looped around our car, staring at us, then looped again to exit the parking lot. Mark said he didn't want to tell us it was a guy because he didn't want my boyfriend to lose his job. I'm pretty sure if Mark would have told us it was the guy, then some shit would have gone down. I'm pretty positive now this guy's been stalking me. For how long, I don't know. I'm starting to think maybe even before he approached me that day in Walmart. It's obvious that the guy drove to Walmart. I want to assume to buy shit, but since he walked out with nothing, I don't know if he was looking for me in the store or what. Saw my car, parked next to it, then realized while he was casing my car that Mark was sitting there. So he asks Mark about the shark fins, to try and make him think he was just interested in how it looked, and not being completely shady. I'm creeped the fuck out, but I have his plate number. This morning before we left work, my boyfriend bought me pepper spray, and I'm now parking elsewhere, and I'm going to start asking co-workers if they'll walk with me to my car in the mornings when I'm done. I don't know what I can do or if anyone would take this seriously. because he hasn't tried anything yet. I'm unfortunately a pretty dainty girl, too brave for my own good, and couldn't fight my way out of a wet paper bag. I'm thinking this definitely isn't over yet. Hey everyone, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 3 True Scary Stories, episode 188. Thank you very much to everyone who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Very sorry I couldn't get a glitch video done today. Tried my hardest, worked my little butt off, but just didn't happen. Hopefully next week, we'll see. And if I can't get a TIFU up this Friday, I'm going to try, but if I can't get that up, I might try and do a Bad Roommates video. I've been meaning to do that for a while. I've actually got one story that I did record tonight. I was recording it for this video, and I was thinking, well, you know, it's a pretty good story, but it's not really scary so much as this person's just a dick. So I'll put that in a Bad Roommates video. It'll fit quite nicely there. But hopefully we'll still have a TIFU on Saturday, and maybe we'll do Bad Roommates next week at some point. We'll see. Oh, before I go, did anyone else shudder when the lady in the last story there mentioned self-checkouts? I hate those things. I think it comes from working in a shop for almost 15 years. Just the very thought of walking into a supermarket and having to serve myself. I'd rather go to the 10 items or less. Not that I'm sometimes a rebel and I have 11 items, but you know, that's just how I live. I live on the edge. Anyway, I think I'm going to head off for now. It's enough rambling. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.